provide everybody with anyway. So happy Friday. This is Nicole Spear from the IMEDS team over at Reagan-Udall. As usual, the phones have been muted to kind of cut back on background noise, but at the end of the presentation, we will unmute everybody and open it up for questions. A couple brief announcements from the lab. The cohort study building tool that was presented on last month's community call is actually now available in the lab. So we sent folks an email yesterday about how to access it. Mark Hader told me that some of you may not be able to view it if you're in a Redshift environment. So if you can't see the tab, reach out to Mark Hader or myself, and we'll work with you individually on that. Also, there's been a number of data refreshes that we also put in that email. But if you have any questions about that, reach out to Mark Hader or myself. So today we have with us Jonathan Herz, who's an informatics analyst joining us from AstraZeneca. He's actually going to be presenting on a new tool he's been working on called Respiratory Flow. And I just want to thank him for giving us an hour of his time this morning. So with that, Jonathan, I think I could just hand it over to you and let me know if you have any problems with the controls and we can jump in.
Thanks, Nicole. So hi, everybody, and thanks for having me today. As Nicole mentioned, I work in informatics for research and development here at AstraZeneca in lovely Gaithersburg, Maryland. And I'm going to introduce Respiratory Flow, a tool for the visualization of asthma treatment pathways today. So Respiratory Flow is one of many real-world evidence initiatives going on in AstraZeneca. We take it very seriously. And it's really an attempt to specifically focus on patient journeys. When you visualize a single patient's journey, as you see in this slide, it's much easier to look at. You can look at all the events of a single patient. You can look at office visits, hospitalizations, prescriptions. You can look at all of those dimensions for a single patient very clearly on this sort of timeline. The challenge becomes to look at patterns in a population. This type of chart does not really scale well. So we tried to look for alternatives, and that's what Respiratory Flow is really about, as we'll see in a few slides. So other initiatives at AstraZeneca include something called Drive, which Emily Willabob, who many of you know, is managing here. This is a whole wide-ranging application that builds cohorts and analyzes different disease and outcomes and does all sorts of epidemiological analyses. So I would say our Respiratory Flow is complementary to this application. If you're interested in this, Emily can tell you more. So to summarize what Respiratory Flow does, basically it's to understand treatment pathways associated with asthma and COPD. We've got a pretty big respiratory portfolio here. We are looking into gaps between current treatment guidelines from GINA and what patients and doctors actually do for asthma treatment in the real world. Our goal was to visualize treatment pathways and real-world patient data to give users an intuitive sense of the very large number of possible combinations and pathways. Again, it's very difficult to summarize that data and try to find meaningful observations in it. So we felt that visualization might be the most appropriate way to allow users to generate hypotheses on the data that they could then look into greater detail on their own. So Respiratory Flow takes multiple sources of observational data, and again, we try to give users some understanding of these real-world treatment pathways. It automates the mapping of different asthma treatment severities and observations. onto a friendly user interface. And we try to get some longitudinal information as well as seasonal records, and hopefully we can identify unmet need for new treatment development. The primary data sources that are used to power respiratory flow, which many of you are probably familiar with, are MarketScan and CPRD. CPRD is basically the health records database that is from the UK's National Health Services. They've got a pretty large percentage of the population in there. I think it's about 10%. And MarketScan is an American database. We use both OMOP mappings for NDC codes and such, and also just the native codings in those databases. Architecturally, we've got this all stored in something called a Netezza appliance. It's a sort of a large-scale data warehouse and analytics engine that's built by IBM and gives us very good performance, even though we're dealing with many terabytes of data. And that also powers Respiratory Flow. So our infrastructure is that we have this database, this data warehouse, and we're able to sit other real-world evidence applications on top of it, such as Respiratory Flow, and also potentially other applications. For example, drives and another real-world evidence application at AstraZeneca. So when we started visualizing treatment pathways, the first initiative was actually something called oncology flow. So just going to give you a little bit of history here, just to show you how different therapeutic areas require different approaches to visualization. Each has their unique challenges. For example, in oncology, you're very concerned with lines of treatment. A patient goes on a first line of treatment, possibly a second line of treatment, and usually treatment stops either because the patient goes into remission, the cancer goes into remission, or death. Asthma is completely different. People have asthma for years. There may be seasonality in the severity of the asthma and the treatments that are needed to control it. And also there may be exacerbation events where a patient has to go to a hospital. And it'd be nice to capture those in the visualization. So different therapeutic areas, different needs, and different visualizations. So I've included the last three slides really for reference in case you guys want to look at the slide deck on your own for the future. At this point, I'd like to actually demo Respiratory Flow live for you. Always a scary prospect. So let's take a look. This main screen is where you start in Respiratory Flow. This allows you to toggle various combinations of databases, types of therapies, and types of visualizations. Additionally, you can choose what injury you want to look at, what asthma severity. Again, this is using the 2014 GINA asthma guidelines. What age range you'd like to look at, so children, adolescents, and adults. Let's leave it on adults for now. And you can also choose to only include patients that have a certain number of years of data. As I'm sure many of you know, one of the challenges with real-world evidence is that, especially in the United States, is that patients may just drop off and you're not sure if they've died or just switched insurers. So we don't always have many years of data for some of these patients. To start with, let's look at the visualization for leukodrying. So this is going to give us something that's called a Sankey Diagram. Sankey Diagram is a general purpose visualization that is used to map sort of process flows. And we've used it here to show asthma treatment pathways and patient journeys. So what are we looking at? This is the first line of treatment. So if you'll recall, in our search criteria, we selected patients in 2011. So this group of patients are patients in our cohort who, at the beginning of 2011, taking leukotrienes. The height of the box is proportional to the number of patients. Here we've got almost 24,000 patients. The width of this box represents the average duration of treatment. So in this case, we're saying that on average, people who start on leukotriene stayed on monotherapy leukotriene for 584 days. Respiratory Flow is still in a warranty period. We just pushed into production, so there are a couple little things that need to be fixed. For example, SABA. You may be wondering what this 51.99 number is. That should actually be a percentage. So what we're actually saying is 52% of these patients were taking short-acting beta agonists, which are sort of rescue medications that are used intermittently whenever you get sort of a flare-up in asthma. And since we are a drug company, we also include how many of these patients are on AstraZeneca medications. So the next column over here shows what happens to patients who switch. They're color-coded according to whether the next line of therapy is more or less serious, so to speak, than the original one. So these are add-on therapies here. A nice feature is that you can kind of move these bars around. So here we're going to move all the leukotriene and ICS combination therapies, just to make it a little bit easier to visualize that. By default, they're simply sorted by the size of the cohorts by the population. So what this is saying is that for a second-line therapy, 2,000 of the original 23,000 patients moved to add on low-dose ICS plus leukotriene therapy from monotherapy leukotriene. I think with this screen you can actually draw some interesting conclusions, which are that for patients who are on monotherapy leukotriene, typically the treatment changes are simply adding on ICS of different strengths, inhaled corticosteroids, and then reducing them, and then possibly adding them on again. You can see this is medium dose ICS plus leukotriene. This is low dose ICS plus leukotriene. Here, let's also put this other. This is high dose ICS plus leukotriene. So the boxes are all color coded. At the bottom is a legend which gives you a detail. But basically, boxes of a similar color have similar medications. So leukotriene is green, LABA is blue, theophylline is red, and monotherapy ICS is grayscale since it's usually used in combination. So darker means you have a higher dosage of ICS. So for example, leukotriene plus high dose ICS is a very dark shade of green. So it's also possible to filter these results a little bit. Let's say we wanted to limit this to Generation Y males, for example. You could do that, and you'll have a smaller cohort. You'll have a subset of the original population. And you can also export this data to CSV and SQL and whatnot. So to get back to sort of the theory and practice of real-world evidence and visualization, what we're trying to accomplish here, I think I'd like to highlight some of the limitations of using this chart. First of all, I think it is a little bit unclear which treatments are under which severity buckets for GINA asthma treatment guidelines. And also, exacerbations aren't really modeled very well here, and that's a thing that we've struggled with. One last thing, we don't really measure calendar time. So you sort of see time in aggregate, but there's really no possibility of even seasonality in this chart. So one fix to this, and the seeing here is taken from our visualization strategy for oncology. Again, in oncology, you have lines of treatment, and this sort of visualization suits the needs of that therapeutic area pretty well. To get the exacerbation risk, we color code by hazard ratio. This is just hazard ratio of having exacerbation. You can see that some combinations end up having higher risk of exacerbation than others. So patients who are on medium dose ICS monotherapy tended to have a pretty high exacerbation risk. So you start on leukotriene, switch to mono ICS for some treatment, and that led to poor outcomes. You ended up with a lot of exacerbations. Same thing here. Seems like people who are on leukotrienes who go directly to monotherapy, medium dose of ICS, tend to have a lot of exacerbations. So I think this is a pretty interesting finding that we've looked at. While this isn't conclusive, I think does merit further investigation. This is an example of how you could use this tool to generate hypotheses that you could then test in a more rigorous way, possibly by going into an epidemiology study or something like that. So to address the other three limitations of this type of visualization for the respiratory therapeutic area, which were lack of calendar information and as a consequence not having any seasonality information, and also a lack of clarity in explicitly showing severity according to gene asthma treatment guidelines. We developed another visualization as well. This tool was developed in something called D3, which is a library in JavaScript, for those of you who are a little more familiar with programming languages and such. This is a very flexible library to develop new visualizations. So for something like Excel or say Spotfire or ClickView, which are tools that are commonly used in healthcare visualization, those tools are good. They give you great out-of-the-box charts. They give you great bar charts, pie charts, whatever. But if you want to create your own visualization, something that really hasn't been done before, D3 is very flexible and gives you pretty good results. So that's what we went with. And let me show you what that looks like. So let's look at a different type of therapy here. Let's look at LABA. And we've called this a disease progression chart. And it's pretty similar to the Sankey diagram, but we've added a couple things to address those shortcomings I mentioned earlier. So here is our disease progression chart. It's pretty similar. Again, the height of the bars represents the number of patients in a cohort. And you can also see treatment flows. What's different here is instead of each column being a line of therapy, which was very useful in oncology, but possibly useful in respiratory and possibly limiting in respiratory, we've got this extra dimension here, this extra visualization here that will give us monthly data. So this shows month by month transition in different medications for this cohort of patients. So this allows you to answer some questions that were not possible to answer with the other visualization. For example, if you started on LABA in the beginning of 2011, what's the probability that you'll still be on LABA in 6 months' time? That's very difficult to answer with the other visualization. And this you can give an observed probability. I guess you wouldn't really give a probability, you give an observation. It's a subtle difference, but still, you have a step in answering that question. Oh, this is CTRD. So I was going to say that with CTRD, it's nice because since they have one payer in the UK, you have fewer dropped patients. So this box here means that these patients are no longer in our records. In American data, this can be much larger because as soon as those patients switch to different insurance providers, they're gone. Also in this visualization, we have something called a gap. This means that this patient was temporarily not taking medications. Again, the colors between transitions show step-ups and step-downs in therapy. Our asthma therapeutic area scientists felt this is very important for their needs. And unfortunately for this chart, I mentioned this is on warranty period. This adding in exacerbation risk is something we have to get our contractors to do here. They originally wanted to do hazard ratio, but since time is fixed here, that's not actually meaningful. You should simply do a rate. It's just extra math that you calculate a hazard ratio because that's the survival model controls for time. So that is the disease progression diagram. I don't think you can really see a seasonal pattern in this data, but possibly with a larger cohort, you might be able to look at that. It just gives us more options for visualization. One other thing that we can do here is highlight AstraZeneca medications and show color by what percentage of patients are using AstraZeneca medications. It's probably not so useful for some of you guys in academia or the government, but we are a company after all. So that's our attempt at visualizing real-world evidence treatment pathways. I don't think it's easy. I wouldn't say this is the final answer in solving that problem. I think it's a difficult problem. I'd be very curious to hear other people's views and things that may have worked or things that may not have worked. And I'd like to open up the floor for discussion and questions, if that's all right, Nicole.
Absolutely. Just looking at, I mean, it's a beautiful interface too, just, design-wise. So we're going to take a moment and unmute the group. If you can just hang tight. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure.
The conference has been unmuted.
Okay, so if you can just announce yourself, keep your phones muted if you're not speaking, and feel free to ask any questions.
Hi, this is Mark Taylor from IMEDS. A couple of questions there. Did you, I assume that you are performing your visualization based on OMA data sets. Did you perform that on the source data also, and did you find any differences between them? And also, did you look into comorbidities like smoking, obesity that can increase the chances of asthma or make it more severe in cases, and identify them using visualization?
So the examples I've given you so far are actually on the native data that aren't using the OMOP mapping, although it certainly is possible to use the OMOP mapping. It's very simple. You just go into the search window and interesting. Oh, here it is.
Oh, I see.
I think it's been taken out, actually. I'll have to talk. It's a good thing we're still in our warranty period. But it is possible to use OMOP. I think they just took the icon out. So unfortunately, we have not investigated comorbidities, although that would be a wonderful next step to look at. The reality is that we have operationally a certain amount of funding to get this done, a certain amount of time to get this done, and we would love to put that in, but it's going to require some uptake from internal AstraZeneca users to convince our higher-ups that they should give more money to put that in. That's unfortunately the reality of it. I'd love to have it in. It's just we just didn't have the resources to do it on the first phase of development.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Let's see. Hui Chao, I believe, wanted to see, he sent a chat in to see the graphic. Wanted to know if we could zoom into the graphic on the LABA.
Yeah, I just want to see whether or not, because you never start patient on SABA directly, I want to make sure why the data shows. So I understand the part, if people would have start on LABA medium. But LABA alone, that does not meet the GINA guideline. I was wondering, is there something wrong with there? Jonathan, I worked in the past, so I know Jonathan pretty well. It's just interesting to see people actually on LABA monotherapy, because usually.
When we look at these searches, we are starting at a specific calendar time. So it's quite possible that this is not where the patient started a therapy. This could be many years into the actual patient's history. So perhaps something that we should think about including is also maybe an average age of the patients or a number of years of history. This does not necessarily imply that the patient, was totally fine before and then the first medication they got was LABA. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying that at the beginning of 2011 we found 845 patients, which is not a large number considering the size of the data set, who were on LABA monotherapy. So it's not really saying that these patients start on LABA monotherapy, but that just at this specific window in time, they were on LABA monotherapy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, Jonathan, I think in reality, or maybe you'll see the patient number is not really big. If you move down the LABA medium dose, let me see how many patients you have in that box. So in the 2 patients, for severe asthma patients, you really see patients on LABA monotherapy alone. That could be potential bug that you want to check with Sauna. This is a disease progression, right?
Yeah, so if you also in medium dose ICS, we should see more.
Let's see what that shows.
Occasionally you get some artifacts here. Oh, goodness. This is a bug here, so this needs to be fixed. So we'll bring it up with Sauna.
Okay. And Jonathan, I know we discussed about the time to exacerbation. I see the hazard ratio. I think it's a very nice way just for some hypothesis generation. So what the solution finally came up to show time to event? Or it was just too difficult to do?
Well, we just got the hazard ratio. I think we could put in time to event because it's all calculated from an R model. And it's just a matter of picking out different outputs from that model. So we've chosen to show hazard ratio. I don't think it would be difficult at all to simply take that other output from the model.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments for Jonathan? We've got plenty of time. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, this is Chris Kaler from Novartis. I'm curious how, you're presenting this as a AstraZeneca tool that you're using internally. I guess I'm curious how others would be able to either use this or build from the learnings that you've had from this, as part of this community.
Sure. So, unfortunately, this tool is not directly open to the public, but for example, at Novartis, our contractor Sauna has IP, and you could license a very similar tool from them. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's not open source or anything like that, but I'm sure Sauna would be happy to work with other drug companies to give you something substantially similar, I'd say.
I guess I'm wondering, is there, or what kind of opportunity might there be to do something kind of in a non-competitive space? Because obviously these are research questions that we're all kind of struggling with in terms of how to work with these databases and do these visualizations. Nothing that you've presented so far I would see as being proprietary necessarily.
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question, sorry. So I suppose it's great to learn other using to figure out what a good visualization for the sort of data is. No, it's not proprietary, especially just the specific implementations, as far as I know. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not entirely clear what you're asking, though.
Jonathan, I think I can comment on that. Now, so you know the history of us building this tool. I think a lot of it, knowledge at disease level knowledge, which will really benefit a greater community. I think I'm very interested. I have a chat with Qing on that, and then I think I'm going to take that to Javier and Jim Weatherall at AstraZeneca to see whether or not this tool can also be open to other pharmaceutical company if we go with a cost-sharing model. I think that's not just for other pharmaceutical companies, even for researchers. I think there's a potential kind of a collaboration in the pre-competitive space, just make the tool benefit a greater community. I think that Chris, wanted to ask. And as also you point out, there's legal issues, other issues, but I think we would like to explore that kind of possibility.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I think more minds thinking about the problem and figuring out how to visualize this data effectively can only help us all. It's not an easy problem, and I certainly wouldn't say that we've given a definitive solution that will never be improved on. There's certainly room for improvement here.
So this is Susan Gruber. I'm the Senior Director of IMEDS Methods Research. And one of the projects on our research agenda that we haven't first yet started involves data visualization. And an idea we've been talking about is organizing a distributed work group for exactly the reasons that you've all mentioned. So offline, I may be emailing some of you and contacting you to ask what you think about doing that through IMEDS, through Reagan-Udall, because that's exactly where we operate. We're a public-private partnership trying to operate in this pre-competitive space to improve the tools available for everybody. So if anyone has a comment on that, I would appreciate hearing it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. This is Chris. So just to follow up, I mean, that's exactly why I raised the question, knowing that this was being presented in an IMEDS forum. It seems like a natural kind of opportunity for us to try to pool resources together as much as possible in this pre-competitive space.
Just out of curiosity, have you guys seen any other approaches to visualizing treatment pathways? We had difficulty finding them, but perhaps you guys have seen other tools that try to do something similar?
We haven't. Oh, go ahead.
So, Jonathan, before I joined AZ, we used IBM tool, and which was a disaster. I think that's another offering, and we tried. But it was very hard to read the algorithm and understand how they massage the data. We provide the data exactly in the format they wanted, but we didn't even know what algorithm going to the tool. And it produced something that's very static. Data goes in and it's static as treatment visualization with very little exploration options. So, but just for your knowledge, that tool still exists at IBM, but I wouldn't make any recommendation on that.
Well, that's a great point you raise about documentation. I think if we are to collaborate on something like this, we will definitely push SAMA and push ourselves to make sure that those things are very clearly explained, because of course you can't base research or even hypothesis generation on just black box methods where who knows what's in it. So we will certainly make an effort to make that transparent as possible.
This is Huifang Liang from Takeda. I am seeing the Truven, the visualization tool. from that tool, they could start with IC diagnosis to define a cohort. They also could start with a certain drug to define a cohort. So what's good about that tool is that they allow users to create like a sample size attrition type of thing, and then you could get a certain sample size to get an idea whether you have enough sample size for your we could use that for feasibility analysis. So that tool is very clear about for which step we've got what kind of sample size. So it could based on ICD diagnosis or even procedure code or drug code.
Mm-hmm. Well, our sample sizes are based on ICD codes and ICD-9 codes, and basically what's in these databases. That's where that comes from.
Okay.
I think there's also a potential to possibly include other data sources in the future as well. Architecturally, on the back end, technically speaking, that is possible. I am less of an expert, frankly, on the real-world evidence and medicine than probably most people on this call, but that at least I can speak to. We have left that open.
It might be easier to do this using CDM format, using real-world evidence type of environments, because the queries will be the same, so the structure for the databases should be the same. So you can create your definition once, and hopefully it will work on all the data sets.
Mm-hmm.
This is Kim Wilson from Merck. I have seen some work that came out of the University of Maryland Computer Interaction Lab that was looking at this type of point and interval event visualization. We actually didn't move forward with implementing it, but it looks like it's something that was developed in their academic center.
Interesting. Point interval visualization. I'll have to look at that.
It's called Lifelines, and there's some documentation on the University of Maryland's website under the Human Computer Interaction Lab. There's also a paper they put out.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I'd like to see that. We did look at something from University of Maryland. I forget if it was that precisely, but we did see some visualization from them that where we basically took the idea of swim lanes for the different severities. I'm not sure if it's the same one, but they do a lot of good stuff at the University of Maryland. Very good computer science department. Any other questions?
Other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for being with us, and thank you especially, Jonathan, for the time you spent with us today. We will get the topic out for the October call shortly, along with that appointment, and everybody have a great weekend. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.